Everybody, welcome to today's lecture on epistemology. We'll begin introducing this branch of philosophy for the next couple of weeks, beginning today. Epistemology is the branch that looks at questions with regards to knowledge. So prior to the midterm, we had looked primarily at metaphysics, questions concerning the nature of reality. And in particular, we left off looking at the question of what is the mind, and we saw the response from eliminative materialists who say, hey, the way we normally think of the mind, well, that doesn't exist, right? Your beliefs, your desires, your thoughts, those mental states aren't real in the sense that we often think they're real, right? Instead of the mind, what eliminative materialists confirm exists is the brain, is the body, is anything physical. Well, the question is why? Why do they believe that? Why do they believe in the brain and the body and not the mind or mental states? Well, this is an epistemological question, right? Because the eliminative materialists are justifying their knowledge based primarily on sense experience, what they can see. This is called empiricism. And when we took a look at personal identity, ask yourself, well, how did we eventually get to the point where we didn't know if there was an I that existed anymore? Well, it was because we couldn't see it, right? We couldn't measure it. We couldn't find it. That's also an epistemological question. How do we know that things that exist can only be known through seeing it? Are there any other ways of knowing things of the world? Now, questions of epistemology aren't just questions pertaining to esoteric subjects like personal identity and the nature of the mind. I mean, we are living in a pandemic right now, and we are being bombarded with information. And we should always ask, well, how do I know that this is true? Did you see this floating around, the Stafford Act post or message, right? From a trusted source of mine, from a trusted friend connected to the UN in New York, please be advised within 48 to 72 hours, the president will evoke what is called the Stafford Act. Just got off the phone with some of my military friends up in DC who just got out of a 2-hour briefing. The president will order a 2-week mandatory quarantine for the nation. Stock up whatever you guys need to make sure you have a 2-week supply of everything. Well, this was confirmed to not be true, at least not the way this was presented, but people believed it, took it as truth, and ended up being fearful and stressed out and taking all the toilet paper off of shelves, right? Questions of knowledge, well, they're important because they often dictate how we behave and how we react to the world. Did you see this piece of news float around the social media networks streams? Breaking news: Russia unleashed more than 500 lions on its streets to ensure that people are staying indoors during the pandemic outbreak. Why would somebody believe this? What is the reason for believing it? Um, Lots of really odd headlines make it through our social media feeds. Which ones do we believe and which ones don't? What's our reason for believing something and not? Did you see this? People claiming to have different ways of getting rid of COVID-19. Some people even advocated colloid silver in various teas and essential oils. Some people advocated using a hair dryer up your nose or down your throat. I mean, think of how many people may have developed a false sense of security by believing these sorts of, I don't know what you call them, these sorts of rumors, right? These messages that were shared to them by their friends, these messages that were shared to them by people that they trusted, maybe a media personality or even a city official, right? If I'm not mistaken, there was a city official that got out and spoke at a council meeting about, hey man, you should use hair dryers, that'll cure COVID. Can you imagine the problems that this would cause with people not just damaging themselves, but potentially harming other people by telling them to do this? And there's even a question concerning, what we get from, traditional news sources and from, conflicting reports that we get from from the scientific community. We hear this 6 feet rule, and there are people that within the scientific community that say, hey, that's too much, or that's not enough, and they'll give justifications for it. Well, how do we know what to believe? At what point should we act on belief? Should we wait for knowledge? What is knowledge? How do we get it? These are all epistemological questions, and hopefully it's obvious to you that these are very important philosophical questions. So, epistemology. Epistemology, as we mentioned, consists of asking questions about knowledge. So one possible question, and it's the one that we'll focus on for the first couple of weeks, is how will we know when our beliefs are true? We had all those beliefs, well, people had various beliefs based upon, all those posts that they saw on the social media feeds. At what point will they go, no, 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 I know that's true? What's the criteria you have for believing something is true? And then another question we'll take a look at in about 3 weeks is, well, what does truth even mean? Are there actually more than one type of truth, or at least more than one definition of what truth refers to? We'll take a look at various responses to that question also. Okay, but our first delving into, is that word? Our first moving into epistemology, exploration of epistemology will be with that first question, right? So we should clarify first that what type of knowledge we're talking about when we're asking questions concerning justifying what we know. So in broad strokes, we can think of knowledge in at least 3 different ways. One is knowledge by acquaintance. So if you're familiar with somebody or with, something, you can say you know them or know that thing. So for instance, if I say, I know Dave Johnson. I'm not saying that I know anything about Dave Johnson. I'm just saying that I'm acquainted with them, right? I'm familiar with them. If I ask you, hey, do you know my mom? I'm not asking if you know any facts about my mom. I'm asking if you're familiar with my mom, if you've met my mom, right? So that's one sort of knowledge of acquaintance, knowledge of familiarity. The second type of knowledge that people often talk about is knowledge of skill, right? Knowing how to do something. I know how to take notes, right? That's something you know how to do. It's something that you developed as a skill. I know how to ride a bike, right? That's an example of some sort of knowledge of skill. But when we're talking about these epistemological questions concerning justifying our knowledge, we're primarily thinking about this third type here. This is propositional knowledge. This is knowledge that something is true, right? So if I tell you, my mom wears size 7 shoes, well, that's a propositional type of knowledge. I'm giving a propositional statement, right? I'm making a proposition. My mom wears size 7 shoes. And notice that it's a statement that's either true or false, right? So propositional knowledge is knowledge about the world. It's knowledge about how things are. I know that we have 47 students in our class, right? That's a statement of propositional knowledge. I'm not saying I know how to do something. I'm not saying that I'm familiar with something. I'm acquainted with something. No, I'm giving you a fact, right? I'm giving you a proposition, a statement about reality. And that's what we're talking about with propositional knowledge. We're talking about statements of reality. I know that the Golden State Warriors have the second pick in the 2020 NBA draft. Right? That's propositional knowledge. Okay, not knowledge that familiar with who the Warriors are, not knowledge with how they draft. No, this is a statement about reality. They are drafting second in the NBA 2020 draft. Okay, so in Western philosophy, as you've noticed for the first half of our class, it's primarily about propositional knowledge. What's the nature of reality? What's the nature of personal identity? Right? What's the nature of the mind? Right? So we've been primarily focused on this third one. But what's this distinction then between knowledge and belief? What's the difference between saying you know something versus just believing in something? Is there a difference? Can believing something really long or really hard, like really believing it, does that make it true? I mean, what does your intuition say? Hopefully, intuition says no, right? Just believing something really hard doesn't make it true. If you really believe you got an A plus, does it make it true you got an A plus on the midterm? You can try it. You can try it right now and believe really hard that you got an A plus. Does that really mean you know that it's true? Does it really mean it will be true? I mean, this goes back to the point that we looked at with all of the quote unquote fake news or the tabloid headlines, right? That people share on their social media feeds. I mean, lots of people really believe that they're true. I mean, they, in their heart of hearts, really thought you could cure COVID by drinking certain fish oils. Does that make it true, though? Does it make it something you know just because you know it, or that's because you believe it really strongly? Let's take a look at an example from the game show Jeopardy. If you're not familiar with Jeopardy, right, it's kind of a trivia game show. And let's say we have a contestant here, and if you don't know how Jeopardy works, right, Jeopardy gives you a answer, and you're supposed to come up with the question, right? So the answer is this planet in our solar system is the closest to the sun. And then you're supposed to give the answer, but in a form of a question. So one of our contestants here, Nabir, said, what is Mercury? This is a hypothetical example, by the way. So let's say Nabir believes the answer is Mercury, okay? But he's not really sure. He just kind of believes it is. So he's guessing. And it turns out he guesses correctly, right? Alex Trebek, the host, says, "You are correct. The answer is, what is Mercury?" Now, just because Nabir guessed and turned out that his guess was right, does that mean he knew that the answer was Mercury? Does that mean he knew Mercury was the planet in our solar system that was closest to the sun? Hopefully intuition says no, right? It feels like it's not really knowledge just because he guessed right. Knowledge seems to be more than that, doesn't it? So classically, when we define what knowledge is, we'll say it this way. Someone, we'll label it S, knows that something, some propositional statement, P, is true if and only if, one, S believes P is true. So Nabir believes that Mercury is the closest planet to the sun. Number two, P actually is true. Mercury is the closest planet to the sun. But also this third part, S is justified in believing that P is true. It's that third part that was missing in the previous example. Some justification in our heads that says, that's how I know it, right? That's how I know it. So one has to have reasons or evidence of some kind to establish that the belief is true. You can't just believe it, right? It can't just happen to be true. It has to be something that you have justified to yourself as true, in addition to you believing it, and it happens to actually be true. So a shorthand way of saying this is knowledge is really justified true belief. It's belief that you have that's actually true that you have justified to yourself somehow. I know it. When you say I know it, you mean I have reasons to believe it's true, and it turns out that it actually is true. Yeah? Doesn't that feel right to you? Doesn't that feel like what you mean when you say you know it? It means you believe it, it's true, and you have reasons to believe it's true. Doesn't that what you mean when you say you know it? Yeah. Okay. But think about these examples. Can you know any of the following? Can you know that the Bible contains God's word? Can you know that killing people is wrong? Can you know that George Washington was a US president? Can you know that dinosaurs existed on the earth in the past? Can you know that there are at least 8 planets in our solar system? Can you know that Michael Jackson, or fill in your blank of favorite celebrity, was an emotionally troubled person? Now, the question really isn't so much can you know any of the following, but it's really if you know anything, if you know any of these, how do you justify it? If you know any of these statements are true, or false, how would you know it? What is your means of justifying it? And that's really the question that we'll be taking a look at for the next couple of weeks. By what means can we know that a certain statement is true or false? Or are we just stuck saying, I just believe it? I don't really know it, but I just believe it? I mean, what would you need in order for you to know something? What would you need? What kind of justification would be necessary for you to know that dinosaurs existed on the earth in the past? I mean, what sort of justification would you need for yourself to know that there are at least 8 planets in our solar system? I mean, what would intuitively for you, what would be the thing that would justify knowing something? Traditionally, when we talk about justifying knowledge, there are 3 major theories. One is referred to as skepticism, right? And this is what Descartes was trying to fight against when we looked at Descartes earlier in our class. The philosophy of skepticism just says that you can't know anything. There is no real way of justifying beliefs. You just have beliefs. In this sense, you can't have objective, true knowledge. And there are, various forms of this. I mean, there's localized skepticism versus global skepticism. Global skepticism means, yeah, we can't know anything about anything. There's local skepticism, which just means, there's lots of things in the world that you can't really know about, but there are some things you can know about. But in general, skepticism is just the philosophy that says, no, you can't really know. It's really they're all just beliefs. There is another branch, right? Another theory of knowledge called rationalism, and this is what Descartes describes too. And rationalism says, yes, you can know, right? You can know through reason, you can know through logic, because when you think about it intellectually, it just makes sense, right? That's rationalism. And we've taken a look already in our class at 2 prominent rationalists. Can you think, besides Descartes, can you think of who they are? And then 3, and this is what we'll talk about this week, is empiricism, right? You know something, you can justify what you know through your senses, through your experiences. And as we started out with, looking at eliminative materialism, it seems that they use empiricism to justify what they know.